Hey guys, welcome to Continuing the Conversation. And so we just finished a month of a great series that we called All About the Benjamins. And if you remember, over the last 4 weeks, we talked about things like how to have financial peace. We talked about what it meant to have a relationship with God, that giving actually started with the heart. We talked this weekend about the tithe. And there were so many great stories and so many great questions that came out of this conversation over the last month. We thought it'd be a great idea to introduce you to some new friends and to continue the conversation, continue answering questions, and continuing allowing for you to hear the story of what happens when God's people take a step of faith when it comes to their finances. So I want to introduce you guys. I want to introduce you to Mike and Amanda Mayo. I want to introduce you to Dale Cole. And of course, our lead pastor, Patrick Conrad's here. And PC, I wanted to ask you a question to start that I thought was so good, because you started the series off really talking about where it began, and that was in the heart. And you said something, there's a quote, you said, you can't understand the tithe, the giving, literally or culturally until you understand what it means relationally to you. And I had this question thinking about you saying that. You were saying it started with the heart. Could you reaffirm that idea that financial giving really is about our relationship with God?
Yeah. Well, from the very beginning, it's always been about a relationship. Money is just a currency. Me and Dale were talking about that earlier, that we transact business and do life, but that's not how we transact our relationship with God. It just happens to be a component of our trust that we use. But from the very beginning, Adam and Eve, again, we talked about it, that there was one thing: do not touch this tree in the center of the garden. Yeah. That belongs to God. And it started there, us just learning there are certain things that belong to God. If I'm ever going to walk deeper in my relationship with God and learn the revelation of who God is to me, I've got to leave that one thing alone, and I've got to take what's mine and use it wisely. Yeah. So it's all about the heart.
That's good. I love the fact that you said, use that word trust, because then you talked about, there was a quote in one of your messages, you said, every time we get paid is a test of our trust. Tithing helps us in several ways. We acknowledge that everything, what you're saying, that everything belongs to God. Mm-hmm. And you shared that, and then we had this phenomenal couple, Mike and Amanda, at our Olive Branch location, shared a story about how learning how to trust God was a big deal for you guys. And we would love for you to talk to Life Fellowship about that journey of trust. Where did it begin for you, taking that step of trust with your finances?
Well, for us, it began, Micah decided to make a change in his career, and that was a leap of faith. He went from a salary position where we had a safety net and found a part-time job that made him happy, and it was a leap of faith, and we began tithing. I shared with you earlier, we tithed on his very first check that was a part-time check. We tithed on $125.
Awesome.
We're a family of 4. That's not very much money for 1 week. 2 days later, in the mail, there was a check that we had received from a company we had overpaid. And so it just, it was a leap of faith, and God continued to show us every time that we tithed and we were worried and we prayed over that money, that He would just take care of us no matter.
Now, did you start tithing before he took the leap of faith and went to part-time, or after?
After.
Wow.
After. Before then, we were givers, not tithers. It was never the 10%. We had been challenged before by pastors, and honestly was just scared. I didn't have that deep relationship with the Lord. But you're not going to have it if you don't take that leap of faith.
What would you say has helped, like you said you didn't have that deep relationship? How's that changed right now in a practical sense for somebody who's watching, who may be faced with the same fear you are? Mm-hmm. How have you practically been able to now you trust God, or what's
it's
that
second
like?
nature now.
Right.
Used to, we would pray every week as we were tithing, and at first Micah was like, I just don't know that we can afford this. And I said, but we've got to afford it. We've got to. This is what the Lord's telling us to do. And now it's the very first thing we do. We've tithed before we've even gone to work the day that we've gotten paid, because we already know.
As we've tithed, it's made my career. I've had advances in the career. My pay has went up, and now it's where, like she said, we don't even miss it.
Wow.
It's amazing how you go from being so scared that I don't think we can financially do this, to now it's like I don't think we can afford not to.
That's good.
Well, and ironically enough, his status is still part-time 2 years later.
Wow.
And we have never missed a beat. We've not missed a payment. We've not missed groceries. We've not missed buying for our children for their birthdays or for Christmas.
Wow.
There's always more at the end than we ever imagined there would be.
I think there's a lot of people that need to hear that. One thing I love about your story is the fact that you share, because what we found is a lot of people have questions, their spouse tension. One spouse wants to take the step, the other spouse is afraid, and I hear all that coming out, but at the end of the day, you kind of leaned into each other and trusted one another, and it sounds like you inspired him and he inspired you, and I think to those spouses who have that tension, you got to look at each other and be inspired by one another's faith, and there is an act of trust there.
One thing on that I would note is I wouldn't nag your spouse
good.
about tithing.
Yeah.
This is a personal relationship thing, and so if you're worried about him or her not tithing, you let God deal with them. It's not about money. It's not like God needs our money.
That's right.
God needs our trust, and
That's
you
good.
can't trust for your spouse. So don't try and take that spot from them.
Very good. Dale, so Dale Cole, he was our highlight story of the weekend. And Dale, I just thinking about your story, remind us when it started for your family. You have a beautiful family. You've lived an inspiring life. You've been faithful in so many things. Take us back to kind of where it started for you when it comes to being generous and taking that step with the tithe.
Well, like I said this past weekend, Steph and I, when we first got married, we had a child. Steph got pregnant right away in the first couple of years, and we started attending a little small church, and I had been taught about taking an offering, just like you guys were saying. You gave something. Everybody, if somebody passes a plate in front of you, you feel obligated to give something.
Right.
Right.
But we just like I said, I'd heard that message about the law of the harvest, and we had a couple that we were really good friends with, and just had some conversations just like we're having today, and we started talking about it, and he was a guy that was tithing, and he was a deacon in our church, and
Wow.
I just had conversations with him, and he just personal stuff, and he just challenged me, when I asked that question in the story last week. I said, well, do you tithe on the gross or on the net or whatever? I was
Right.
like, he's like, which one you want to be blessed on?
That's good.
How big a blessing do you want?
Right.
That's really, I'm just like these guys. It's just, in my life, that's how it's been. It's like, you go out and you step out on faith and do something, God just does something so extraordinary. You're like, how can you? So all that does is just challenge you to even give more.
That's
Right.
good.
So that's what's cool about it.
Isn't it interesting that we were talking earlier about how it's just second nature now? And when you're giving, you're just like giving, I don't know what amount to give, I just give what I feel I can, or I give what's available, whatever. And there's no intention. There's no real deliberate.
Yeah.
And the Bible says to know, bring your offering and bring your gift, and know in your heart what you want to give beforehand, so that it can be a cheerful act of worship. And I think the tithe gives that intent.
Yeah.
It gives you it down to you know exactly what I'm going to give, and there's an expectation, there's an intentionality to it, which gives direction to your giving, gives purpose to your giving, and as an act of worship. So I think it's really interesting because you said that, and then earlier we were talking about how I just give now, second nature, but I don't have to deliberate.
Well, and I think the story of Cain and Abel really hit home. I mean, I grew up learning that story. It was a Bible story. You heard it in Bible school every year, and it was in Sunday school. But I guess as an adult, it means more that I give him my first 10% because that's my
good.
best 10%.
Yeah.
That's the untouched. It's not the dirty, I guess,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
say. I haven't started taking selfishly from it
Yeah.
because
Right.
we
That's
give
good.
generously from it. To the
Yeah, that's
community.
that faith
Yeah.
portion. It's easy. It's easy to spend the 90 and see if there's any left.
Yes.
But what I love about
Yeah.
that first portion is, God, I don't know if the tires are going to fall off my car or my refrigerator's going to. I'm consecrating this as an act of trust and faith. Dale, how long ago was that? Was that 20 years? How long ago was that?
Yeah. We've been married 31 years, so
31
So-
glorious years.
30.
So 3
years.
decades. Here's what I want. because I feel like there's so many young couples, there's so many people that's never taken that step, and they've got a million excuses why not to. And what I want to encourage every viewer that you're here and you feel like, I can't do that, there's not enough left, there's nothing in the budget, I'm filled up with debt. I want you to listen to 30 years of wisdom saying if you will take that step of faith, God will not let you down. And I think sometimes it's as simple as saying, there's people that's walked before me, that's lived this journey, and I can trust that they've experienced that with God. And I'm going to lean into that wisdom.
Yeah, and I think it's a personal thing.
Yeah.
So that's why I tried to be very ginger in teaching the truth as an absolute. But yet, as it relates to you, you've got to journey this on your own. No one can press you into it. You're going to give begrudgingly. You're going to feel like it's a part of the law. You're not going to really do it right. And so I think it's very important that this should be preceded by prayer and probably accountability to your spouse. You need to let somebody know I'm gonna do this or whatever. But what do you think, Tim, or some other things that because this can be overwhelming to someone who never saw this coming. I'm just getting into my faith. I'm just learning a lot about God and my relationship. And now all of a sudden I hear this thing about the tithe. I always knew something about giving or offering. And I knew Life Fellowship maybe did it differently with the giving stations. But what is this? This is sort of overwhelming. What are some advice you could give a younger couple that maybe trying to figure out how to be generous?
Well, I think just hearing your stories and your story, PC, of you sharing, our heart is for you to experience the miraculous hand of God. And we know that the tithe is a way that it activates God's hand in our lives in many ways. Here's what I would say. If you're a young couple and it seems overwhelming, almost polarizing, and it seems like I can't do that, you have a tendency to think if I can't do that, then I shouldn't do anything at all. And what I would drive you to is just a couple things. The first thing I would do is I would sit down with your family and start praying. I would look at each other and go, we see that this is a reality in Scripture, and so we've got to have the conversation. We've got to start praying. The second thing I would encourage you to do is get serious about tracking your money. I think the stewardship side is as important because a lot of times it's when your budget is in chaos, it feels like I can't give or I can't set apart a portion of my income, but the reality is your financial life is in chaos. And so I would say start by becoming a great steward. And then I have two prayers. My first prayer is that you would start by giving the tithe. That that scripture that you shared says that we're able to test God, that we would actually take the test of trust and faith. We would get our budget in order and we would cut that tithe check as a first portion to God. The second thing I would say, if you're listening, you say, I can't do that. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to pray with your family. I want you to get serious about stewardship and tracking every penny. And then I want you to determine what is a big to you offering that you could start with. Instead of saying, I can't do anything, say, 10 seems like I'm not there. Well, start with 5% or start with a big to you offering and see the faithfulness of God. But keep in mind that God desires for you to bring that first 10% as a tithe. That would kind of be a process of what I'd love to see couples do.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, again, what we wanted to do was sort of share with you some stories, share with you some hope, and hopefully some information, maybe even revelation about what God says about being generous. And we want to continue this conversation. And so if you want to go to the website and go actually to our email address.
Yeah, we've noticed that there's so many questions that you guys are asking. Please don't stop asking questions. If you have a financial question, go to info@lfchurch.tv. Send an email with your question. We'd love to keep the correspondence going. I want to thank Micah and Amanda and Dale for being a part of our continuing the conversation. Thank you guys for sharing your story. It makes such a big difference. You guys have a great weekend. We'll see you in our brand new series that's coming called Ghost Stories this weekend. See ya.